For many years, a monster in Iowa tormented communities and committed awful crimes against women and children. The monster's name was Michael James Klunder. Michael was a violent sexual offender, kidnapper, child murderer, and suspected serial killer. On May 15, 1971, Michael James Klunder was born to Jimmy and Cheryl Klunder of Kensett, Iowa. 10 years later, Michael's parents divorce and his mother, Cheryl Klunder, gets custody of Michael, the youngest of her 3 sons, and his 2 brothers. 3 years later, in 1984, their father filed and received custody of Michael and one of his brothers. One of Michael Klunder's classmates described Klunder as being a real shy and quiet kid, a typical teenager. On November 15, 1986, in what is considered to be Klunder's first crime, a 15-year-old girl was kidnapped and brutally attacked. On the morning of November 15 in Kensett, Iowa, Evelyn Leisure Ganson was delivering newspapers for the Globe Gazette and had just dropped off one at a home of one of her social studies teachers. As she spun around after delivering the newspaper, she saw 15-year-old Michael Klunder pointing a gun at her. He told her to come with him and took her to a public restroom at a nearby Ball Diamond and took her through the door. Klunder told Evelyn to take her clothes off, then brutally attacked her, banging her head against the wall in the restroom, then pistol whipping her in the head. She lost consciousness. When she regained consciousness, Klunder was gone. Evelyn began to drag herself home, a few blocks away, bleeding. Her body was peppered in bruises. She only had 2 things to say to her family members when she got home: gun and Klunder. Evelyn was rushed to what is now the Mercy One Medical Center, North Iowa. Evelyn needed around 90 to 100 stitches and lots of bruising, and blood was present on her body. 15-year-old Michael Klunder was taken into custody by juvenile authorities and eventually found guilty of a delinquent act. Klunder was sent to the Boys State Training School in Eldora, to Meyer Hall in Des Moines, to the Bremwood Juvenile Home in Waverly, and to the Mental Health Center in Cherokee. Upon Klunder's release in February 1988, he lived in Mason City. Later that month, he choked a woman who was able to escape from him. He was charged with assault to commit serious injury and then sent back into the juvenile system until he turned 18. Upon his 18th birthday, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison on a burglary charge, unrelated to the choking incident, and 2 years on the assault charge. Old newspaper clippings say that his youth and possible rehabilitation played a part in receiving a lighter sentence. He initially faced 10 years in prison. In February 1991, Michael Klunder was released early from prison after being treated in the sexual offender program at Mount Pleasant Treatment Center. In December 1991, Michael Klunder was now living at the Lantern Park Apartments in Charles City, Iowa. On the morning of December 16, 1991, Michael Klunder lost his job. His neighbor described him as being very depressed, said he needed friends. On December 16, 1991, the same day Klunder lost his job, 2 3-year-old girls were abducted outside of Charles City Daycare and were later found dumped in a garbage receptacle in Kensett. The authorities believed Klunder was responsible, and 8 days later after the abduction, he was later arrested in Houston, Texas at a bus depot. His car was found abandoned on a road in Tallahassee, Florida. In January 1992, Klunder was extradited back to Iowa and held on a $1 million bond. On January 10, 1992, news was released that Klunder was a suspect in an assault on a 21-year-old Rudd woman, in an incident that occurred on December 15, 1991, just a day before the kidnappings of the two girls. Klunder was charged with third-degree kidnapping and assault with intent to commit sexual abuse. By September 1992, Michael James Klunder was sentenced to 41 years in total for the two incidents which occurred on December 15 and 16, 1991. For the kidnapping and assault charge of the 21-year-old, he was sentenced to 11 years in prison. For the kidnapping of the two 3-year-old girls, he reached a plea agreement and was sentenced to 30 years in prison on reduced charges of third-degree kidnapping and 1 count of willful injury. On December 25, 2011, Michael Klunder is paroled, having served 18 years of his 41-year sentence. On July 13, 2012, two cousins, 8-year-old Elizabeth Collins and 10-year-old Lyric Cook Morrissey, go missing from Evansdale, Iowa, and after exhausting efforts to find them, their remains were found 5 months later on December 5, 2012, approximately 20 miles away in Seven Bridges Wildlife Area in Reedland, Iowa. On May 20, 2013, two girls from Dayton, Iowa were abducted by Klunder after they got off their school bus to walk together. Klunder pulled over to speak to them in his red Toyota Tundra pickup truck and asked them if they wanted to earn money to mow lawns. The girls said they would have to talk to their parents first, so he offered to take them to their house, and they both got into his truck. Instead of taking them to their homes, Klunder took them to a hog confinement building several miles away in rural Pilot Mound, Iowa. After being kidnapped, one of the girls escaped, grabbing Klunder's gun on the floor, and ran outside to the woods. Her friend unfortunately did not escape Klunder's clutches. After murdering Kathleen Shepard, Michael Klunder committed suicide by hanging himself. His body was found the same day at approximately 8 p.m. in Taylor Avenue in rural Dayton, Iowa. Blood evidence of Kathleen Shepard was found on the ground of the hog containment building, and blood of hers was found in Klunder's red truck.
DCI investigators just finished up a press conference here just a few minutes ago, releasing significant new information. They have confirmed that DNA evidence has confirmed they found Kathleen Shepard's blood on the ground around the hog confinement where Klunder allegedly took her and the 12-year-old girl. They found it on the ground on the hog confinement, but they also found it on Michael Klunder's truck. They said they found the blood on the back tailgate of his truck, and as we mentioned, DNA evidence has confirmed that it is that of Kathleen Shepard. Now, DNA investigators declined to go into how much blood it was, but they did say that it is a significant amount to show that Kathleen Shepard did sustain injuries. Take a listen as DCI agent Bill Keitzman explains.
There's no way to quantify the kind of blood you find on a ground. You know, there's just no way to tell. It was enough for us to believe that she would have had injuries. You know, some injuries that would be a factor.
Now here's a look at his truck. Investigators are asking anyone to come forward who saw the truck between 4:50 and 8:20 on Monday afternoon. It has a silver Tommy lift tailgate and a silver toolbox on the driver's side. Now, significant things that show that his truck, it has no license plate. There's also a DOT paper plate behind the driver's side of the back window. Investigators are also announcing they've expanded the search about 10 miles north and northwest of where Klunder's body was found. They say that's because they're learning more about his habits, where he drove, where he hung out, what he did on a daily basis, and they want to expand the search even more because of that information. They said much of that information has actually come from Klunder's wife. They said she is not a suspect. She has fully cooperated, and she's provided them significant information at this time. We can also confirm that Klunder did die by suicide because he hung himself. The state medical examiner's office did release today that Klunder did hang himself. Now, we want to show you some video we shot earlier today. We actually went out with search crews again, day 3 on this extensive search. Although we have new evidence to show that Kathleen Shepard did suffer some pretty serious injuries, the community is definitely not giving up hope in finding her.
They have a tip or something, that's why we should be out here today.
Thursday, searchers focused again on the area where the girl's backpacks and purse were found. Dressed in bright yellow vests, they spread out over the Boone County town of Fraser, looking specifically in roadside ditches.
Our biggest fear is that Catherine Lynn's somewhere and can hear us and hear everything going on, and we're not finding her. So we're trying to stay shoulder to shoulder and cover every inch.
People in town say they're frustrated. It's now been 3 days since 15-year-old Kathleen Shepard went missing. Wednesday, authorities released a picture of her on the school bus to show people what she was wearing when Michael Klunder allegedly kidnapped her. And now we have a picture of 12-year-old Desi Hughes, the little girl who managed to escape. Desi spoke publicly for the first time late Wednesday, telling the local online paper that Klunder tried to lure her and Kathleen by offering them money to mow lawns. She said he promised to drive them home so they could ask their parents for permission, but instead drove them here to this hog confinement where he separated the girls. Desi says she took Klunder's gun he left behind and ran into the woods to escape. Her chilling words have haunted the town of Dayton.
I mean, this is just so horrendous.
Thursday, authorities wore protective gear and oxygen masks to search the hog confinement Desi escaped from. Despite all efforts, still no sign of Kathleen.
We're getting frustrated, but we're not giving up hope. We just got to keep coming out here and doing what we got to do to get her home.
Now, just to recap what we've already told you, there was significant DNA evidence found at that hog confinement that you saw in the story there. Authorities have confirmed that amounts of blood were found on the ground at that hog confinement and on Michael Klunder's pickup truck. They say that that blood is Kathleen Shepard's. Now, we asked DCI authorities, is this a recovery at this process? And they said no, they are still holding out hope. They're still calling it a rescue and not a recovery, despite this evidence that diminishes hope that Kathleen will be found alive.
Laura Nichols reporting live from Dayton. Thank you, Laura.
And for the first time, we are actually hearing the voice of that 12-year-old, Desi Hughes, who escaped. In an interview with Iowa Public Radio, she described how she got away and why she says she's no hero.
He left the gun on the floor, so I took the gun and ran outside into the woods and hid. I don't feel like a hero though, because I feel kind of regret, because I feel like I should have went back and tried to help her.
Once again, after kidnapping the girls, Klunder killed himself by hanging.
Well, we are also learning more about Michael Klunder's history. Court records show a violent juvenile past. In 1986, at age 15, he was charged with attempted rape. 2 years later, he was charged with burglary and assault. And we have learned he has a son. In 2005, while Klunder was in prison for kidnapping and his son was 9 years old, Klunder petitioned for partial custody. Records show the boy suffered from psychological problems. The boy's mother said Klunder was to blame. Klunder's request for custody was denied.
Well, Southeast Webster Grand School is trying to calm fears about the kidnapping by assuring parents and others that the girls were not abducted on school grounds. A note to parents also asks them to talk to their kids about stranger danger, saying, quote, "I truly believe we cannot teach or revisit safety information or your home rules enough with our children. They may get bored with the information regarding what they should do in certain events, but it should become second nature."
And there is more focus now on a possible connection between the Dayton kidnapping and the Evansdale cousins. 10-year-old Lyric Cook and 8-year-old Elizabeth Collins disappeared last July. Their bodies were found in a Bremer County park in December. The Evansdale police chief says a dozen investigators are now looking into a connection because of similarities in these cases. Now, wrapping up today's developments, here's another look at Michael Klunder's truck. Investigators are asking for anybody to come forward who saw this truck Monday afternoon between 4:50 and 8:20 p.m. They say Kathleen Shepard's blood was found on the tailgate of the truck and on the grounds around the hog confinement where Klunder took both girls initially. Well, the search area has expanded 10 miles north and northwest of the site in rural Dayton where Klunder's body was found. If you know anything, you are asked to call the Webster County Sheriff's Office. That number is on your screen. It's 515-573-1.
3 days after Klunder abducted Kathleen Shepard and her friend, Kathleen's body was found in the Des Moines River in Boone County. Her cause of death was from multiple sharp and blunt force injuries. The clothes matched what Kathleen was wearing on the body, and the zip ties found on Kathleen matched those used to restrain the younger girl who escaped. The investigators in the Evansdale murders case started looking at Michael Klunder as the possible perpetrator in the murders of Elizabeth Collins and Lyric Cook Morrissey.
Kidnapper and murderer Michael Klunder believes he's responsible for doing the same thing in Evansdale to two cousins. Emily Price with insight on this investigation, new at 10.
Two Iowa towns, two sets of girls about the same age, vanished on a sunny afternoon just months apart.
The fact that there was two in both cases seems to connect them.
The kidnappings happened about 100 miles from each other in northern Iowa towns, both not far at all from Highway 20. 3 girls died, Lyric Cook and Elizabeth Collins from Evansdale and Kathleen Shepard from Dayton. Desi Hughes managed to escape the Dayton kidnapping, and yesterday she and her mom and stepfather spoke to us about what happened.
Still be looking for both of them, I believe. And we wouldn't even know who, what, when, where, why, or how. He'd be moving on to the next set, and I believe that. I don't think he was ever going to stop.
Do you think that he's responsible for the girls in Evansdale?
I do, personally. And I'm sure that there's some that people don't know about that he's responsible for because he's got quite...
42-year-old Michael James Klunder was made the only suspect in the Evansdale murders case due to his modus operandi in how he would target and kidnap his victims. Michael Klunder was a large man and had been documented with different heights from 6'2" to 6'6", weighing over 250 pounds. Michael Klunder was an evil person with a sexually violent history stemming back to his youth. He checked many boxes in regards to being the possible killer of the Evansdale girls. It was reported he never waited more than a year to act on another crime, which usually was violent in nature. As time passed since the murder of Kathleen Shepard and him being made a suspect in the Evansdale murders case, he was eventually ruled out by the Evansdale investigators, claiming they have proof he was not connected to the murders of Elizabeth Collins and Lyric Cook Morrissey in 2012. Michael James Klunder was someone who slipped through the cracks and should have never been released from prison for his original crimes.
The stubbornness of my family, we're not going to stop until it's done. If it takes 1 session or 10 sessions, we won't stop. There will be a law.
Their daughter was kidnapped and killed 2 months ago. Now their fury turns into a fight to keep repeat predators off the streets. Tonight we've learned they're already meeting with lawmakers to start gathering support. Before Michael Klunder kidnapped Kathleen Shepard and Desi Hughes in Dayton on May 20th, he had been convicted in 3 kidnappings.
And we are learning more tonight about an unusual twist in the cases that kept him from being locked up longer. Emily Price investigates what happened.
It is on this stretch of Highway 18, right on the Floyd County-Cerro Gordo County line, that Michael Klunder found one of his first kidnapping victims. It was December 15th, 1991. A 21-year-old woman named Lori was driving alone.
Mr. Klunder apparently flagged her over and said she had some sort of equipment violation. I believe she got out of the car to check it out, and then he grabbed her, concealed her in his car, but fairly quickly, before he could do whatever he planned to do, she was able to get away. In that process, he assaulted her and she was able to flag down someone, and my understanding is then he took off, and I think that's when he ended up in Texas.
Just from how he was with me, he seemed like a very angry person, and I guess just a monster.
Law enforcement eventually caught up to him. They charged him with third-degree kidnapping and assault.
I was in the office at the time the Klunder case was prosecuted.
Cerro Gordo Assistant County Attorney Steve Tynan did not prosecute Klunder's specific case, but remembers plenty of conversations about it. He remembers well the disappointment of not being able to charge him with first-degree kidnapping so that they could put him away for life.
We didn't even have probable cause to argue that they were serious injuries.
The 21-year-old victim on Highway 18 did not have horrible physical injuries.
Her injury, I think maybe a few scratches or something like that.
Obviously a good thing, but it also meant Klunder only faced third-degree kidnapping and 10 years in prison instead of first-degree kidnapping and the rest of his life behind bars. That wasn't the only disappointment for prosecutors. Documents show the jury in this case had the option of finding Klunder guilty of third-degree kidnapping with the intent to commit sexual abuse or the lesser charge of kidnapping with assault causing bodily injury. The jury chose the lesser charge, saying there was no sexual link to the crime.
He grabbed her, he pulled her in the car, he must have had something in mind, and then he assaulted her. I don't want to say anything to criticize the jury. The jury did their job. It was a little frustrating, though.
Also a little frustrating, a few months after this court case, Klunder reached a plea deal on the kidnapping of two 3-year-old girls. For all 3 kidnappings, he'd be sentenced to 41 years in prison, but served just 18 due to good behavior. The outcomes of the 2 cases ended up coming into play when Klunder was released from prison in 2011. There is something called the state's multidisciplinary team that could have decided to send Klunder to this high-security treatment facility in Cherokee that's strictly for sex offenders at highest risk of reoffending. But because there was no sexual crime, Klunder was released from prison with no restrictions, and 2 years later lured Kathleen Shepard and Desi Hughes into his truck. Hughes was able to escape. Shepard's body was found 18 days later in the Des Moines River.
If we can help protect just one child in Iowa or the nation, then this tragedy, as bad as it was, can mean something.
Kathleen's family is now fighting for tougher laws on kidnappers and anyone charged with crimes against children. They feel like the system failed her, and even seasoned prosecutors can't help but think that something needs to improve.
Looking back, yeah, I thought that we did what we could.